This lighting's not so bad.
You can't see me. Hello.
Hello and welcome.
Hello. Welcome.
There we go. Hello and welcome to the second episode of All Folked Up. This is a series where I talk about folk music and history and how they connect to each other. And this is episode 2, so if you haven't watched episode 1, check that out. It's on my channel. Click down there someplace. Today we're going to be talking about early American folk music. Now, America is a super diverse country, and so it only makes sense that the folk music reflects that national identity. So there are so many different types of American folk music that it would be probably a whole series in itself worth of videos if I tried to tackle it all. So for the purposes of this project, I'm going to be focusing on the early music of the region where I live, which is New England. The earliest New England folk music came from the people who settled New England. This was mostly white people of British origin, and they brought their folk music along with them when they came to the New World. So because of this, the earliest American folk music ended up being a combination of traditional British folk songs. This includes the balladry tradition. If you don't know what the ballad tradition is, you should check out episode 1. So the earliest New England folk music ended up being a combination of traditional British music and the new northeastern folk culture that was being created. A lot of American traditional folk music is characterized by the instruments. Folk music that was primarily for dancing would utilize instruments like the fiddle and the banjo and later on the guitar, and this style of music would later grow into the bluegrass music that we know and love today. Traditional music ended up being a really big part of daily life in early America. People would sing while they worked, they would sing during celebrations or for religious or social occasions. A lot of early American ballads contained moral lessons, a lot of which were about unfaithful lovers or temptation or sin. You can tell that religion played a pretty big role in the music of this time period. Now, when the American Revolution rolled around, it created a whole new subgenre of American folk music. It could be considered the first social movement to utilize folk music as a means of rallying and unifying its supporters. By the 18th century, people in Europe started recognizing their own traditional music as so-called folk music. And they decided that America didn't have any folk music of its own because it was so young that it didn't really have a history yet. By the 19th century, America had certainly been singing not only the folk songs of their British and Irish ancestors, but they'd also been making their own. So, sorry Europe. We're just that cool. Now, a really good example of Americans creating their own folk culture is found in the music of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, when Scots-Irish immigrants came to Pennsylvania and the Alleghenies, they brought their music with them. So as settlers began to spread west through Kentucky or South Carolina, they would sing songs about their journey. A lot of wagoners had their own wagoning songs, sort of like sailors had sea shanties. More on sea shanties later. And these would entertain people on the long, sometimes boring journeys to their destinations. New instruments came into style, such as the mountain dulcimer and the banjo and the jaw harp. Now, the people who ended up settling in the mountains sort of developed their own identity of being tenacious and survivalist and courageous and self-sufficient, and they had songs called things like "A Mountaineer is Always Free" that reflected this mindset. There were also songs like "The Copper Kettle" and "Mountain Dew," which were about, you guessed it, making and drinking moonshine. Here's an example of New World music with Old World origins. In England, there's a song called "The Gypsy Laddie," but in the New World, it was adapted and changed to become a song called "Black Jack Davy." The original song has themes of magic and the supernatural like we can expect from the English balladry tradition, but the new version was sung by a more practical group of American settlers, and so the magical aspect is pretty much done away with, even though the narrative remains the same. While American and English folk music sound very similar, the themes of America's folk music are indicative of the new spirit of a new country where the people were independent and self-sufficient and ready to fight for what they believed in against all odds. A lot of the themes of American folk music are the same as the ones that we talked about in the last episode. Things like love and death and adventure in the world around you. But American folk music also had themes of living in a new world, traveling and living on the road, surviving in harsh environments. and fighting to survive in a new world just like America was fighting to become its own nation. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Any questions, comments, or concerns? You know where to put them. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you later for another episode of All Folked Up. Bye-bye. Battles that they won, or battles where they really kicked that other general's butt.